Okay, fine. Now that's doing that. Now we go back to the Zoom. Where are we? Okay, I just want
Okay, fine.
That's right. Zoom. There we go. Jamira is here. Terrific. Okay, so we're all set. We're amazing. Okay, so let's start, and we're going to start with our tefillah. And okay, all right. Oh, I have to share my screen, don't I? Share screen. That's it. Right, there you go. All right. ריבון העולמים ואדוני אדונים, אב הרחמן והסליחות, מודים אנחנו לפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ולאבותינו, בקידה בשתחוויה, שקרבתנו לתורתך ולעבודתך עבודת הקודש, ונתת לנו חלק בסודות תורתך הקדושה, מה אנו אומר חיינו, אשר עשית עמנו חסד גדול כזה. על כן אנחנו מפילים תחנוננו לפניך, שתמחור ותסלח לכל חטאותינו ועוונותינו, והיו עוונותינו מבדילים בינינו לביניך, וכן יהי רצון מלפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ולאבותינו, שתכונן את לבבינו ליראתך ולבבך, ותקשיב אוזניך לדברינו אלה, ותפתח לבבינו הערל בסודות תורתך, ויהיה לימודנו זה נחת רוח, לפני כיסא כבודך קרח ניחוח, ותציל עלינו אור מקור נשמתנו בכל בחינתנו, שיתנוצצו ניצוצות עבודך הקדושים, אשר על ידם גלית דבריך אלה בעולם, וזכותם וזכות אבותם, וזכות תורתם ותמינותם וקדושתם, יעמוד לנו לבן לקשר בדברים אלו, ובזכותם תראה עינינו במה שאנו לומדים, כמאמר נעים זמירות ישראל, גל עיני והביט הנפלאות מתורתך, כי אדוני ייתן חוכמה מפיו דעת ותבונה, יהיו לו נימי פי, ויגון ליבי לפניך, Adonai Tzuri v'Goali. Master of the universe and Lord of lords, Father of mercy and forgiveness, we give thanks before you, O Lord our God and God of our fathers, bowing the head and prostrating ourselves, that you brought us close to your Torah and to your service, the holiest of services, and you've given us a portion of the inner meanings of your holy Torah. What are we? What is our life? That you've dealt with us such a great loving kindness as this. Therefore we lay our supplication before you, that you forgive and pardon all our sins and iniquities, and do not let our iniquities separate us from you. And may it be your will, O Lord our God and God of our fathers, that you prepare our hearts to have reverence of you and love of you. And may your ears listen to these our words. Open our uncircumcised heart in the inner meanings of your Torah. May this our learning give pleasure before the throne of your glory as a sweet-smelling fragrance. Bestow upon us the light of the source of our soul in all its aspects, and may your holy sparks, may the sparks of your holy servants, through whom you revealed these your words into the world, shine forth, and may their merit and the merit of their fathers, the merit of their Torah, their wholeness and holiness, stand by us, that we do not stumble in these words. And through their merit, enlighten our eyes on what we are learning. As the sweet singer of Israel said, open my eyes and I will look on the wonders of your Torah, for the Lord gives wisdom from his mouth, knowledge and understanding. May the words of my mouth and meditation of my heart be acceptable before you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Okay, great. All right, so what we're going to do today is we're going to look at the whole question of what influence each one of us has, okay, and how in fact we're actually far more powerful than we realize. And this is very important because when we've got things happening, you know, like we've got in Israel right now with rockets falling down from Hamas and people having to run for shelters and people being afraid of being wounded, killed, it's not a nice situation. And then you've got also the Arabs rioting in the mixed cities. You know, when it's a frightening situation, and so you really wonder, you know, what you feel like. You feel very small. You say, well, what can I do? And the answer is we can do a lot. Okay, so we're going to look at this from perspective of Rabbi Ashlag, and I've got, let me just put this thing up here. Yeah, okay. the first thing we're going to look at is a piece which is actually from the very end chapter of Tapestry for the Soul. Okay, so this is the last chapter. All right, and I find it amazingly powerful. We'll spend most of the time on this, but I've got some other things as well that I want to share now. And, we'll discuss it as we go along. I need to share screen again, don't I? Share screen, that's it. That's it. There we go. All right. So the innermost aspect of the Torah and its relationship to Israel and the world. Okay. Introduction to the Zohar. So this is a translation of Rabbi Ashlag's introduction to the Zohar. If anybody doesn't know it, it's not an introduction really. It's the most deep and profound discussion or exploration on the essence of the human being. Okay, it's called the introduction, but it's not an introduction in the normal sense of the word. You normally think of an introduction as some sort of a précis or something, but it isn't. It's an actual deep and incredible essay. Okay, now you must know that everything has an inner aspect and an outer aspect. In the world as a whole, Israel, the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is considered to be the innermost aspect. The 70 nations are considered to be the outer aspect of the world. Within Israel itself, there is an inner aspect which consists of those people who are seriously committed to their spiritual work of serving God. And there's an outer aspect consisting of those who are not involved in spirituality. Likewise, amongst the nations of the world, there's an inner aspect which consists of the saints of the world, and an outer aspect which consists of those who are destructive and coarse. Even amongst those of Israel who serve God, there's an inner aspect and an outer aspect. The inner aspect is those people who are privileged to understand the soul of the innermost aspects of Torah and its secrets, and the outer part consists of people who only deal with the practical aspects of Torah. Now, this is the most important bit. All this can also be considered likewise in one individual person, okay? Now, at this point, he's not talking about whether you're Jewish or not Jewish. In the first bit of the paragraph, okay, he's talking about the children of Israel in relationship to the other nations, okay? When you're looking at the whole world, the human community as your spiritual entity, as one spiritual entity, then you can look at that and say, okay, there's an inner bit and an outer bit, okay? But you can also take the one individual person, okay, as your spiritual entity. And then the same thing is going to apply. The individual, whoever he is, can be one of the children of Israel or not, okay, has within him or her an innermost aspect, which is the aspect of Israel within the person. And this is the point of divine light within his or her heart. He or she also has an outer aspect, which corresponds to the 70 nations of the world and relates to the will to receive. Okay? These internal nations of the world, okay, which represent our wills to receive, our ego, our desires for ourselves alone, have the capacity for tshuva. They don't have to stay like that. We don't have to be selfish. They can cleave to the innermost divine part of the person's soul, and they then become like the righteous converts who join with the community of Israel. Okay, so let's get that picture right. We've got an outer and an inner part of everything. So if we take the human community, the inner part of the human community is Israel compared with the other nations. Within Israel, there's an inner part and an outer part. Likewise, in the nations of the world, there's an inner part and an outer part. And within the individual, there's an inner part and the outer part. And the inner part is the aspect of ourselves which wants to serve God. The word Israel is Yashar El, straight to God. Okay? So this is the point of divine light within our heart. Okay? So far, so good? All right, call out if there's any issues. Now then, why do we need to know this? Because this is our point of power. A person may reinforce and respect his or her innermost aspect, which is the aspect of Israel within the person, over his or her external aspect, which is the aspect of the nations of the world within the person. He or she then strives to put most of his or her energy and labor into increasing and enhancing his or her innermost aspect for the soul's sake. To those aspects of himself or herself which correspond to the internal nations of the world within that person, he or she gives only the minimum required. That is to say, the person only gives the minimum to his or her wills to receive for oneself, according to what is written in Pirkei Avot. Make your Torah your main occupation and your work secondary to it. Now, a person's deeds affect both the inner aspect and the external aspect of the world as a whole, because the whole world is made up of individuals, all right? We are part of what makes up the whole world, okay? We're not separated from it. He or she causes the spiritual level of Israel to go up. And then the nations of the world, which comprise the external aspect of humanity, will recognize and value Israel. But if, God forbid, the opposite occurs, that an individual of Israel enforces and values his or her outer aspects, which is this aspect of the nations of the world within himself or herself, over and above their inner aspect of Israel, then according to the prophecy of Deuteronomy, the stranger that is within you, which refers to the external aspects of a person, will prevail over you higher and higher. And you, as you are in yourself, in your innermost aspect, in your aspect of Israel within you, will go down further and further. And thus a person causes by his or her deeds that the externality of the world, which is the nations of the world, ascends higher and higher and has power over Israel and humiliates it to the dust. And they, which are the innermost aspect of the world, go down further and further, God forbid. Do not be surprised by the fact that an individual person, through his or her deeds, can cause an elevation or degradation of the whole world. There is an unalterable law that the macrocosm, the totality, and the microcosm, the individual, are as like to each other as 2 drops of water. The same procedures that occur with respect to the macrocosm occur with regard to the individual and vice versa. Furthermore, it is the individual components themselves which make up the macrocosm, and thus the macrocosm is only revealed through the manifestation of its individual components according to their measure and their quality. So certainly the act of a single person, according to his or her capacity, may lower or elevate humanity as a whole. Let's stop there for a second. Are you blown away? I mean, this is really remarkable, because normally when we read the news, we feel impotent. We feel we can't do anything about it. We can't help. In actual fact, we can. Okay? Not only that, but he seems to be implying that we have a direct relationship between what's happening on the outer as what's happening on the inner. Okay? So this is really I think it's one of the most powerful pieces of writing, because it really helps us see what we can do. Okay. On the one hand, I mean, you know, it's uncomfortable, because it would be nice to think that let somebody else deal with things. All right. That would be, you know, that would be what we would like in a way. But this is actually to tell us that we do have much more power than we realize. We can affect things for good. They don't have to be particularly big things. Just to value the God within us, just to value the Yisrael within us, the divine spark within us. This is the most important thing we can do, okay? Because there's a direct relationship, as is shown, between the divine within us and the children of Israel on the outer, and the wills to receive ourselves alone, and their external manifestation. Let's move on then. I forgot if there's no question.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah, please.
Just to be more clear on this, I mean, I watch the news and I see something horrible happening. I obviously can't do anything about something. There's a fire, there's war, there's whatever. I'm sitting in some corner of the world. I can't do anything. Are you insinuating that the way I can help with that is by just doing good for the things around me, because that's all I can influence?
Definitely. That's exactly right. We don't have to go to the war zones or to be in a particular place. Just by doing the good deeds that we do in our own environment, in the place that God put us to be, whether it's Greece or whether it's Denmark or whether it's America or wherever it is, just by putting our focus on loving and compassionate and our Torah learning, whatever we can do, we are affecting the world, okay? We are affecting the world. We are all one soul, okay? So when we focus on our innermost aspects, the innermost aspects of the world goes up, okay? And that brings peace and compassion and love and for everybody, absolutely for everybody.
So that's a lovely thought. So you don't sit there feeling useless or helpless, more like it.
I think it was, for me, it was one of the most powerful thoughts that came through in learning tapestry, in learning Introduction to the Zohar. I mean, it was such an amazing idea that Rabbi Ashlag is telling us, you don't have to be a big politician. You don't have to be, you know, a leader of a party. You don't have to you don't have to write letters to the newspapers. You don't have to put stuff on social media. What you do need to do is to focus on the relationship between yourself and God and enhancing the God aspect of yourself. That's what you need to do, because that will automatically enhance the God aspect in the world, and the forces of evil will subside. It's like
we'll outnumber them in a way.
Huh?
We'll outnumber them in a way.
Yeah.
If
I think it's even more than outnumbering. The power of the quality of the tzaddik, of the righteous man, is far outweighs the power of the evil man. There has to be always a balance, okay, in energy, an energy balance between good and evil in the world. That's in order to give us free choice. So at any point, anybody is always in balance. We're always in balance. We always have that balance of good and evil within ourselves as well, to give us also that free choice. Now, if we look at it in quantity terms, it certainly seems that in quantities, the number of wicked or disconnected people from God outnumbers those who are connected with God. But that's okay, because the power, Rabbi Ashlag says that we do not understand the power of one action that is done completely for the sake of giving. We don't understand how powerful that action is, whether it's a prayer, whether it's a good deed, whether it's whatever it is. When we do it without a wanting for ourselves, we don't understand how powerful that is. So definitely just being where we are and putting our attention on the God within, okay, and its expression, we're actually raising up the God element in the world, which I think is, it's phenomenal.
Great. It is. Thank you.
Yay, great. Now then, anybody else got any questions or comments? Yeah, Lauren, I agree with you. Really is.
I mean, I think we learned also earlier about every mitzvah, every even small mitzvah he does, it helps.
Yes, it does.
But we learned it in another way. We learned it as the mitzvah brings light into the world.
That's right. That's right. There's many ways that this idea is expressed.
And that's how this is something different, because now we're talking about other people as well. We could fall below the other people if we're too bad.
Yes, that's right.
That's a totally different way of thinking about it, that we have to be careful that we don't slip to other people's levels or let our levels slip.
I think that's right. And I think also that there's an aspect of not being proud. I think it's very important that we don't get proud, that we realize we're here to serve, we're here with a responsibility, we're here to give to the rest of humanity. We're not here to be proud. I think that pride has always been a big downfall for the Jewish people. You know, we're proud to be the chosen people or something. That's nonsense. That's not at all what why we're here. We're only here to be the conduit, okay, to enable the goodness to flow to all peoples. All right. And it's not because we're better than anybody else, but that's the role that we've been given. Okay, so we have to do our role. We have to understand that we have a responsibility. And so our responsibility, especially when there's in these times, to understand that how much we can really help the situation. And of course, I mean, like if peace comes, you know, Bezrat Hashem soon, it's not only we who benefit, it's also the people in Gaza who benefit. I mean, it's heartbreaking. Really it is. You know, they're little children or whatever caught up in something which is nothing to do with them, basically. It's not their fault they've got terrible leaders. So the more we can do to bring that energy, that positive energy of giving and kindness in our own lives, the more this thing will resolve. Okay.
I understand too that doing teshuvah
is a
big part of, doing teshuvah for, you can do mitzvahs, but you can also do teshuvah is important to do for bringing the balance back away from the judgments, to bring it back from the den that's happening.
That's such an important point that you brought up, Tavora. You really have. I mean, when we see a situation like this, then we have to realize that judgment is happening and we're not okay, because if we were okay, this couldn't be happening. So therefore we do have to do tshuva. You're absolutely right. I mean, that's one of the most important things that the sages tell us, that if something's happening, we need to look at our deeds. We need to look at where we are and do tshuva. I mean, I think it was last week or the week before, we learnt about how the children of Israel, had fallen down in the wilderness, at Rephidim, and they were just receiving for themselves alone, and they weren't acting from a place of faith. And then what happens? Amalek came and attacks them. It's a bit like, Hamas attacking. What's the difference? Okay. So what we need to do? What did they do? They did such a great tshuva that they reached Har Sinai and received the Torah. So from this place where we see something happening, we really need to do tshuva. You're quite right, Devorah. Thank you for bringing that up. That's so important. That's what we need to be doing, to understand that we have caused it by our deeds. Exactly what he says here, that the externality of the world, which is the nations of the world, ascends higher and has power over Israel and humiliates it to the dust. Whilst we, the innermost aspect of the world, go down further, God forbid. So if something is happening, then we do have to understand it's that we ourselves have caused it to some extent, definitely. And to do, like you say, tshuva. Brilliant. So this idea of tshuva, I think, is so important. And this is why we can understand what's stated in the Zohar, that through the study of the Zohar and the practice of the true wisdom, we can bring about an end to our state of exile and a complete redemption. We could ask what studying the Zohar could have to do with redeeming Israel from among the nations. What has studying the Zohar got to do with this whole situation? Okay. Let's have a look and see. The Zohar says, and so many people in this world will benefit from this book, the book of the Zohar, which will be revealed in this world in the last generation at the end of days for the sake of that generation. It's through the merit of the book of the Zohar that the redemption will come, as 'tis written, and you shall proclaim freedom throughout the land for all its inhabitants. A jubilee it should be for you, and each one shall return to his ancestral home and to his family. From what we've already seen, it's easy to understand that the Torah, like the world itself, has an inner and an outer aspect. Likewise, the one who occupies himself or herself with Torah has these two levels. So to the degree that a person, when practicing Torah, strengthens and focuses on the innermost aspects of Torah and its secrets, he or she gives strength to this measure to the innermost aspect of the world, which is Israel. Then Israel begins to fulfill its true function with respect to the nations, can then value Israel's role among them. What does this mean? Okay, why do we have to learn Zohar? Why do we have to learn Kabbalah? The answer is like this. It's only when we learn the Kabbalah that we actually begin to understand who we are, what we're made up of, that we're made up of the will to receive for ourselves alone, that we need to look at why we're doing the mitzvot. Okay, the how of how to do the mitzvot is in the halacha. Okay, what we have to do is also in the Torah and in the halacha, but the why we do it is the Kabbalah. Okay, and it's in that Kabbalah that we begin to be able to look at the different aspects of ourselves, because it's through that understandings that the Kabbalah gives us that we begin to see from which part of ourselves we're functioning. Okay, and this is why we actually need the Kabbalah to help us. Okay. Now, I want, before we go on here, I wanted to bring another piece, which is, no, that's not in the right spot. 1 minute. I wrote it down. Here we are. Here. This piece here. This is from Master of the Ladder. Okay, it's a translation from Master of the Ladder, and it's Rabbi Ashlag's shofar. Okay, and I think here it gives you more clearly why learning the Zohar, learning the Kabbalah in general, helps us understand the different relationships of ourselves, and then we can act in accordance with what he suggests. Okay? He writes like this. Oh, can you see that? Or do I need to share the thing again? I'm not sure. Do it just to be sure.
We can see it.
We can
Okay,
see it.
thanks. I don't know. All right. Our society is analogous to a band of travelers who, starving and thirsty, are wandering in a desert. Suddenly, one of them finds a settlement where there's all good. He remembers his unfortunate brothers, but he's wandered far away from them, and he doesn't know where they are. What can he do? He begins to shout in a loud voice and sound the shofar. Maybe his starving and wretched companions will hear the sound and draw near to him, and they also can come to the settlement filled with good. So is the matter before us. We, together with the rest of humanity, have been wandering in the dreadful desert of the lack of knowledge of God. But now we found a great treasure filled with all good, the books of Kabbalah. This is the treasure that satisfies the yearning of our souls and fills us with contentment and ease. And so we eat our fill and even have some left over. But the memory of our companions who are still lost in the dreadful wilderness is engraved on our hearts. Even though the distance between us is great and we cannot communicate with them, nevertheless, we've organized this shofar with which we call out. Maybe our brothers will hear, come close to us and be happy like ourselves. Know, my dear brothers, my own flesh, that the main thrust of the wisdom of Kabbalah is the knowledge of how the world devolves from the perfection of the heavenly heights all the way down to our lowliness. The end of an action is contained in its original thought. The fulfillment of thought when it pertains to the Creator is instantaneous. Unlike ourselves, the Creator does not require any vehicle in order to implement thought. Therefore, in accordance with his thought of creation, we emerge directly in our complete perfection in the Ein Sof, and then that's the infinite, and then we devolve down to this world. It follows that it's very easy for us to find all the required tikkunim, all the required rectifications that we have still to do from the knowledge of the processes of the spiritual worlds that preceded us, because they go from above to below, okay? And we have to go from below to above, but it's the same route, okay? So basically, if we know which route it is, okay? If we know what is the route, at least we know the road to tread, okay? So if we get that knowledge from the processes of the spiritual worlds that came out first, from them we know how to correct our ways from now on. Okay, and this is why we learn Kabbalah. He goes on to say, the human being has an advantage over the beast whose spirit descends. What does that mean? It means that the animal cannot see further than itself. It's got no intelligence or understanding to know what it went through in its past in order to correct its future. The humankind has an advantage in that the spirit of the human ascends to the past, which is the higher worlds from which we emerged in our spiritual past. And so we can look into the past, into those processes, since the world devolves from the perfect to the imperfect as one looks into a mirror. And thus we may see how to correct our defects. So a person who's intelligent looks into his past, as described in the wisdom of the Kabbalah, and consequently can rectify his needs from then on. His deeds. I think I should say his deeds. Yes, sorry. Mistake. By contrast, there's no spiritual development for the animals. They still stand at the same level of consciousness at which they were created, because they don't have a mirror through which they can understand how to correct their ways and through which they could gradually develop as the human has. Humankind gradually develops day by day until its worth is certain and felt. Now, All that is true regarding our dealings with natural external ways. That is, our dealing with the nature of physical reality surrounding us. Our food, our external affairs, all those sort of things, our natural intelligence is certainly sufficient. However, regarding our inner selves and our essence, our natural intelligence is not sufficient. We do develop a little, but our development and improvement occur by being pushed from behind through suffering and the spilling of blood. And this is because we have no natural tactic through which we may attain a mirror that will enable us to see the innermost aspects of those who lived in generations gone by. And this is even more the case with regard to the innermost workings of the souls in the world. And the innermost aspects of those who've gone by, I mean, we're talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, these Moses, these incredible pure souls, okay? But if we could only understand them, we would understand ourselves so much better, how to relate. This is even more the case with regard to the innermost working of the souls in the world. We need such a mirror. So we may learn how they developed, how we developed, and how also we need to understand how we came to this dreadful destruction to which we bear witness today. Such a great destruction that we will have no surety of our lives, and we are about to be slaughtered through strange deaths within the next few years. And all acknowledge that we have no counsel how to prevent this. I think he must have written this just before the Holocaust. Just imagine for yourselves, if, for example, today, you were to find a book that describes the generations that will come to be in another 10,000 years, a book that describes both the wisdom of the nations and the ways of the individual, then our leaders would be searching in it for every remedy by which we may organize our life here and now until we come to the state in which there is no scream in our streets, when all the slaughters and the dreadful suffering will be nullified and everything will come to its correct consciousness in peace. And now, my friends, here in this cabinet, you have arranged and laid before you the book in which all the wisdom of the nations and all the ways of the individual and of the community that will actually come about at the end of days is written and explained. This is the book of Kabbalah, in which are laid out the rectified worlds that came forth in perfection, since from God, perfection comes forth first. Accordingly, we may correct our ways and come to the same perfection that already exists and is manifest in the highest world of the Ein Sof, in the original thought of creation, according to the principle that the completion of an action depends on its original conception. From the perfect, the imperfect can emerge only through a gradual process, stage by stage. In the realm of spirituality, nothing is lost. Every stage exists and is described in all its likeness and character, both in its general aspect and in detail, in the wisdom of Kabbalah. Open these books and you will see the correct order of the good that will become manifest at the end of days. And from them, you will obtain a good doctrine on how to organize matters today, even regarding the needs of this world. We can learn from the history of what has passed and correct the history yet to come. And this he goes on to saying, it's a beautiful piece. All this I've placed on my heart, and until I can no longer refrain. I received approval from God to reveal something of what I perceive and what I found written in these books of Kabbalah concerning the ways of the tikkun of our certain future. I will go forth to the children of the world with this shofar, which in my opinion and evaluation will suffice to gather all those who have merit. They should start to learn and meditate in the books and thus tilt themselves and all the world to the side of merit. Okay. So this is why he's telling us that, actually go back a paragraph that we said earlier, so many people in this world will benefit from this book, the book of the Zohar, which will be revealed in this world in the last generation at the end of days, for the sake of that generation. It's revealed to us now. It was not revealed to my father. My father never had the opportunity to learn Zohar. Okay, so it's been revealed to us now for the sake of this generation. And it's through the merit of the book of the Zohar that redemption will come, because it's through that, this work of Kabbalah, that we can actually learn who we are and how to do that tikkun that we need to do. Okay, and then of course, when we do that, we will influence the world for good. Okay, and then it goes on to say, and then Israel begins to fulfill its true function with respect to the nations, who will then value Israel's role amongst them. And then shall the words of the prophet be fulfilled, and the people shall take them and bring them to their place, and the house of Israel will settle in the land of the Lord. And similarly, thus says the Lord God, behold, I shall lift up my hand to the nations and set up my standard to the peoples, and they shall bring your sons in their arms, and your daughters shall be carried on their shoulders. Kings shall be your foster fathers, and their queens your nursing mothers. From Isaiah 49. In other words, Israel, that is to say, the will to receive in order to give benefit, will triumph over the will to receive oneself alone, which will then act as support and handmaiden to the will to receive in order to give benefit. But then he goes on, but God forbid the opposite could happen. A person of Israel might devalue the most intimate part of Torah with its secrets, which deal with the ways of our souls and their levels, devaluing also the intellectual considerations and reasons of the Torah, and emphasizing instead only the outermost aspect of Torah that deals with the practical issues alone. If such a person ever concerns himself or herself with the innermost aspect of Torah, then he or she sets aside only a small portion of his time to it, not giving to it the attention it deserves, but treating it as if it was superfluous material. And by behaving in this way, he or she lowers and degrades the innermost aspect of the world, the children of Israel, reinforcing the externality of the world over them, who are the nations of the world. And thus they, the nations of the world, cast Israel down and despise the children of Israel, and consider Israel to be a superfluous entity in the world of which there is no need, God forbid. And not only this, but these people further cause the outer aspects of the nations of the world, who are coarse people who damage and destroy the world, to prevail over the inner aspects of the nations of the world, who are righteous among the nations. And then they cause terrible destruction, slaughter, and holocausts, such as our generation has been a witness to. God preserve us from here onwards. And thus we can see that the redemption of Israel and all the worth of Israel is dependent on the learning of the Zohar and the innermost aspect of the Torah. And the opposite is true also. All the afflictions and degradations that have come upon the children of Israel are on account of their neglecting the most intimate part of Torah and not having valued it, but having related to it as something superfluous, God forbid. He wrote this, obviously, just after the Holocaust. Rabbi Ashlag went to Poland. I think it was about 1930 something. And he went to Europe, he went to Poland, and he pleaded with the rabbis there to teach Kabbalah, to teach Zohar, because he said, if we don't do that, then there's going to be a tremendous catastrophe. He tried to persuade people to come on Aliyah, and he wasn't successful, as we know, unfortunately, or he was successful at a very limited extent. And that, unfortunately, that's what happened. So,
Yedida.
yes.
So why was it, or we heard about like you could only married men over 40 could learn Kabbalah? Why was it like that?
That's a very good question. Why was it?
I mean, there was very, and even I remember hearing something in the show about on the Talmud. It was very restricted who could do it, and like only 1-to-1, and it was very limited. Were people afraid of it, or what? Or how did it come to be like that?
Okay, so that's a very good question. So let's just answer that question. Wait a minute. How do I? Oh, I don't need to. How do I do stop share? I don't know. Oh, there I see stop share. Right. That's a very good question, actually, Nicole. It really is. Rabbi Ashlag kind of relates to this in several places. First of all, he says that there's two aspects to Kabbalah. Okay, one is the content, and the other is the language of Kabbalah. And the truth is that the language in which Kabbalah was written, how to understand it was lost. Okay, it's some time between the period of the Gaonim and Rabbi Moshe and the Holy Ari, that actually how to understand Kabbalah was lost. And people were, the sages, I think at that point forbade it because they thought since the language has been lost and we don't know how to understand it, it's too easy to make some sort of materializations, because the Zohar actually uses a language which is called the language of the branches, which means that they use words, concepts which originate in this world, but they're actually really pointing to the meanings in the higher worlds. And since the connection between the branches and their spiritual roots was lost, and they didn't know actually what it meant, so the rabbis kind of said, okay, don't study it. But the honest truth is that wasn't true of all the communities of Israel. It's true of the Ashkenazi communities. It's not true of the Sephardi communities. The Sephardi communities never stopped learning Zohar. Even if they didn't actually understand it too well, they never stopped learning it. And it's printed, Zohar is printed in, pieces of Zohar printed in the Siddur, in the Sephardi Siddur, and people say them. They never stopped, they never lost their connection with the Zohar. It was only in the Ashkenazi communities that happened. So that was one aspect. When that
Shabbatai Tzvi.
Sorry?
They said they became more restrictive after Shabbatai Tzvi, the Ashkenazim. After the disaster of Shabbatai Tzvi, they
Yes, you're quite
became more
right.
restrictive about it.
You're quite right. That's right. I'd forgotten that piece of history. Yes, there was an absolute catastrophe for the Jewish people because, so the Ashkenazim were very made extra restrictions on that. But basically, Shabbatai Tzvi, okay, so he was a peculiar, I mean, it's a very peculiar story. I don't know too much about him. He was somebody who proclaimed that he was Messiah. I think it was, I can't remember which century he lived in, something like around about the 17th century, let's say. Okay. And a lot of the Jewish world was like really, really enthusiastic and supported him and everything. And then ultimately he converted to being a Muslim. And this was like a disaster. I mean, so many people went astray through him. I'll write it down for you. His name is Shabbatai Tzvi. Look him up on Wikipedia. I don't know the story very well, but it definitely was a catastrophe for the Jewish people at that point. And yeah, you're right, from then on. But the restrictions on learning Kabbalah ultimately acted to they might have protected for a time, but it went beyond that, and it's actually become formed, Rabbi Ashlag writes, an iron barrier between ourselves and the innermost aspect of the Torah.
I think I read somewhere too that the reason why you had to be 40 and you had to be married and there were all those, protections built in was because some of the Kabbalah was also being misused, and the rabbis wanted people to be really grounded, like older people grounded in Torah and having had a life of, religious teachings before they would go into the Zohar. Is that right?
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. But I think, in fact, now that Rabbi Ashlag came, I mean, one of the things that he did was he writes this, it's actually in, I forget which book it's in. I think it's in Tapestry for the Soul. Pretty sure it might be there. What he did do was I think it's in 16, chapter 16. What he actually did was, yes, here we go. Let's look at this, what he says here. They stopped learning the Kabbalah. From here you will understand the nature of the dryness and the darkness which is to be found in the Judaism of our generation. There was nothing like it at all in previous generations. This is because even those, oh, wait a minute, I forgot to share the screen, sorry. There you go. All right, there was nothing like it at all in previous generations. This is because even those people who take their religious life seriously have abandoned the study of the secrets of the Torah, that is to say, Kabbalah. Maimonides gives a true example of this. He asks us to imagine a line of 1,000 blind people going on a journey who are led at the head of the line by at least one person who can see. They can still be sure that they're going in the right direction. They will not fall into any snares or traps in their path since they're following the one who can see. But if the one person who can see is missing, they will undoubtedly stumble over every obstacle laid in their path and will all fall into a dark pit. This is exactly our situation. If at least the people who are the spiritual leaders of our generation would occupy themselves with the innermost aspect of Torah, that is the Kabbalah, they would draw to themselves a complete light from the Ein Sof, blessed be the one. As a consequence, the whole generation would be able to follow after them. Everyone would be sure of their way and would not stumble. But if the spiritual leaders of our generation have removed themselves from this wisdom, then it is little wonder that the whole generation stumbles on account of them. From the great sorrow that I feel, I cannot write any more on this. And I wrote, how would society be different if the educators in both formal and informal education, the spiritual leaders and the political leaders of the community, how would society be different if they would know and act according to this material? I mean, it would be so different, wouldn't it? How would it be if we actually were taught at school what is our will to receive for ourselves alone? What separates us from each other? What brings us together? What unites us? How can we be giving? What the actual essence of what we are actually is? How would that be if we actually got taught that at school? It would be very different. He goes on to say, I know that this reason that this has arisen is mainly due to a lessening of faith in general, and in particular, a weakening of faith in the great tzaddikim and masters of previous generations. The reason why they forbade it is this: the books of Kabbalah and the Zohar are full of images drawn from the physical world, because that's the language that they use, the language of the branches. And people did not know how to understand it because they'd lost the key. And so people became afraid that they might not understand this imagery in the correct way and fall into a form of idolatry. This is what has inspired me to undertake the task of properly explaining the work of the Aryan of the Holy Zohar. I have completely removed this fear because I have explained and clearly demonstrated the spiritual and analog that exists for every entity, stripped of any material image, not connected to space and time. Those who are interested can see this for themselves. I've made it possible for everyone in the house of Israel, and I think now the rest of the world as well. I mean, it's out there now, okay, to study the Holy Zohar and warm themselves by its holy light. I've called my commentary the ladder to illustrate the fact that the purpose of my explanation is the same as that of any other ladder. If you have an attic full of bounty, all you need is a ladder to go up, and then all the good of the world is within your reach. But the ladder is not a goal in itself. We don't learn Kabbalah to become Kabbalists, okay? That's not why we learn it. We learn Kabbalah to get to the attic. What's the attic? To be able to be giving just as God is giving. That's the attic. That's the goal, okay? If you're just to rest on the steps of the ladder, if you're just going to learn Kabbalah just for the sake of being more learned, okay, then you're not going to fulfill the intention. All right. That's the piece I wanted to do.
You remember Rabbi Cohen, who has been teaching out of your book? Remember?
Yes, I do.
Wait, in one of his ceremonies talking, he was saying that also that with Kabbalah, there's two aspects. There's a higher aspect that you won't find in books. It's only taught one-on-one.
That's right.
So
that's right. If everything is divided up into 10 sfirot, okay? Also the wisdom is also divided into 10 sfirot. Everything is, okay? Now, we are only allowed to learn what relates to the lower 7 sfirot. Okay, these are called the Ta'amei Torah. Okay, and this is what is published in the books. So anything that is published, okay, by authentic, proper teachers like the Bala Sulam, like Rabbi Ashlag, like Rabbi Nachman, like the Bala Tanya, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Vladi. By authentic teachers, you can be 100. The Zohar itself only comes from the lowest 7 sfirot, what we're allowed. These are called the Ta'amei Torah. And Rabbi Ashlag writes, this is in his introduction to the study of the 10 sfirot, he writes and he says, not only should it not be hidden, but on the contrary, it's an obligation to learn this part of Torah, the lower 7 sfirot. Anything that's printed, you can be 100, if it's from an authentic source, you can be 100% certain it's perfectly okay and perfectly safe to learn it, okay? The part that is not, we are not allowed to learn except one-on-one and only in certain circumstances is called Sitrei Torah, the secrets of the Torah, and that's like, and you're quite right, that belongs to the higher 3 sfirot, and we don't learn those. So anything that's printed, you can be 100% certain is from the lower 7 sfirot because they never printed the what pertains to the higher 3 sfirot, because the highest 3, because they would have understood that if it is printed, it could go anywhere. You can't stop a book. But once it's out there, you can't stop a book going, wherever it goes. Okay. Leah's written on the chat. The name of the book I was reading from is reading from two different books. The first one I read is A Tapestry for the Soul, and that is the introduction to the Zohar, and it's also it's also the same material as in Shadow of the Ladder as well. And then the other book is Master of the Ladder. Anyhow,
you did that?
Yeah.
How do you know which level you're learning? You said that. So you said that it's divided up into the 10 sfirot. So how do we know which? I've heard. When we learn something, how do you know which sphere it connects to? I don't know. This is totally confusing. I know there's sometimes I have classes, they talk about like, you can see the body and the difference. So every aspect we're learning, we can learn in 10 different ways.
No, I don't think it's like that at all. I mean,
I don't understand where you say that this is.
okay, so what let me just finish that.
Sorry, I'm a bit confused about this.
All right. Okay. No, it's all right. Okay. So let's start again. Everything in the world, everything, whatever it is, can be looked at as being made up of 10 sfirot. Okay. Now there's a rule which says the highest three sfirot of anything we don't have any awareness of. We are only in our lives dealing with the lower 7 sfirot. Okay. Doesn't matter. Okay. So the high, it just relates to what Devorah said, that there's a part of the Kabbalah which is not appropriate for us to learn. That's true. Rabbi Ashlag said that belongs to the first 3 sfirot. Okay. And then what belongs to the lower 7 sfirot is what pertains to us. And what belongs to the lower 7 sfirot is called the Ta'amei Torah, the reasons for the Torah. And that is 100% kosher for us to learn. Now, if you ask me which sfirah relates to what, I haven't the faintest idea. Okay. All right. Now, when you learn Zohar, one of the things that ways in which Rabbi Ashlag works is he does tell you which spiritual level you are, which sfirah you're working with. And it's not in order to it to become mystical or anything like that, but because the different sfirot are different vessels for receiving the light. And it's helpful for us to understand, are they acting as receivers? Are they acting as givers? What's their actual functioning? The sfirot are really ways of understanding the components of the vessels and what their desires are. Okay, I personally don't really go for learning, that chesed is this and chesed is loving kindness and gevura is strength, all that kind of thing. The sfirot are more like, it's easier to work with them when you understand that they're more like letters of the alphabet. Okay, they're like the building blocks, which together make up particular ways of receiving the light. Okay, you have to be a real, Kabbalist or something to understand which sfirah is working where. It doesn't really matter for us. It's not relevant. What's relevant for us, and this is what Rabbi Ashlag emphasizes always, what's relevant for us is to know that learning Kabbalah brings us close, gives us more understanding of ourselves and teaches us how to connect with God. That's much more important. To actually know what sfirah it is or whatever, it's not important.
That I can understand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we don't need to know which sfirah is doing whatever. It's not it's not important.
Okay.
Yeah. Great. All right. Wonderful. Okay, everybody. Well, we did. Wow, the time just fled by. All right. So I hope it gave everybody food for thought. Okay. And it gives us all hope and encouragement. Okay. That just where we are, who we are, in our own communities, we can do so much to help the world. All right. Okay.
Thank you.
Everyone. So let's hope for a peaceful week next week. Bezrat Hashem.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Hi, Lauren.
Thanks.
How you doing?
Yadida Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. We'll stop the recording.